Chapter 26 Madness. The Radio Tokyo men were back at Omori, gushing compliments. Would Louis broadcast another message to his family? Louis accepted, but when he arrived in Tokyo, the producers announced a change of plans. They didn't need the message he'd written, they had one ready. Here's me, Louis Zamperini. I was reported to have died in combat. Boy, that's rich. Here I am, just alive as I could be. This reminds me of another fellow. He told me that he was officially reported as killed in action, but in reality was a prisoner of war. After several months, he received a letter from his wife in which she told him that she had married again since she thought he was dead. Boy, I really felt sorry for a fellow like that. And the blame lies with the officials who allowed such unreliable reports. The least they can do is to let the folks back home know just where their boys are. It's certainly a sad world when a fellow is killed off by a so called official report. Louis was aghast. This message wasn't meant for his family, it was meant to discourage American troops. He refused to make the broadcast. Undeterred, the producers took him on a tour. They took him to a cafeteria and served him a delicious American meal, then showed him a comfortable bedroom. If Louis would do a broadcast, they said, he could live here. They introduced him to three propaganda prisoners. As Louis offered his hand, the men dropped their eyes. Louis knew they were telling him not to accept. Louis suddenly understood why he'd been spared execution on Kawa Julien. A famous Olympian criticizing America would be a priceless propaganda tool. He'd be sent to hell of Afuna, then to Amari, and then the Bird, to make this life in camp unbearable so he'd be willing to betray his country to escape it. Smiling, the broadcasters invited Louis to accept this easy new life. Louis refused. The smiles evaporated. They ordered him to do it. He said no. The producers left to confer, then returned. I think you go to punishment camp, one said. They waited for Louis to change his mind. He didn't. Louis was dumped at Omori. The Bird was waiting for him, glowing with fresh hatred. His beatings resumed with intensified vigor. Louis stood his ground with rebellion boiling in him, praying the Americans would come. In the afternoon of November 24th, 1944, the Tokyo sirens began to howl. From above came an immense roar. The men looked up to an astounding sight. Acres and acres of B 29s, 111 of them, so high they looked like gleaming slits in the sky. The Americans had arrived. The POWs cheered. The guards stared up, so awed by the planes that they didn't seem to hear the men shouting. As the POWs watched, a lone Japanese fighter raced up, then abruptly, startlingly, flew straight into a bomber, shattering and raining down on Tokyo Bay. The bomber fell, white smoke twirling from it. A single parachute puffed from its side. The bomber hit the water. The lone survivor under his parachute wafted into Tokyo. The other bombers flew on. There was distant booming. It was only the beginning. B-29s passed over Omori nearly every day. Sometimes lone planes, sometimes continents of aircrafts. Sometimes the men saw licks of flame far away. Tokyo's war industries burning. Civilians streamed over the Omori Bridge and camped by the walls in hopes of escaping the bombs. One day, Louis stood outside watching Japanese fighters circling a crowd of B-29s. The battle was so high that only the giant bombers were consistently visible. The tiny fighters flickered in and out of view as sunlight caught them. Every little while there was a sharp, brief burst of light. It was the fighters, gunned by the B-29s, blowing up. The bombers went imperious. The Bird watched stricken. Hokiko Dam, he said. Hokiko Dam. Japan's planes, he was lamenting, were no good. Every B-29 that crossed over Tokyo wound the Bird tighter. He slapped an officer repeatedly for 5 minutes. He pawed through the men's belongings, destroying family photographs. He was seized with paranoia. You win war, he screamed. You make all Japanese like black slaves. He hauled Bob Martindale to his office, accused him of plotting arson, and beat him so wildly that he overturned all his furniture. One night during a sleet storm, the POWs were jarred awake by the Bird, charging through camp, ordering a fire drill. When the designated firefighters assembled, the Bird punched them, ran through the barracks, shouting and hitting men. ordered all POWs outside, then drew his sword, swung it around, and screamed orders. For 2 hours, as sleet drummed on the shivering men, he forced them to pump water on imaginary fires. Beat phantom beat phantom let's be imaginary fires, beat phantom blazes with brooms, and run through buildings rescuing food and documents. As December progressed and the bombers kept coming, the bird's mania deepened. He marched the officers into Tokyo, leapt on a water trough, drew his sword, and screamed, Kairi! As the men saluted, the bird stood in an exaggerated troop reviewing pose, lost in a fantasy of military glory. After the POWs had passed, he jumped down, ran ahead, and hopped on another trough, shouting, striking his poise, and demanding salutes. Over and over he repeated the farce, driving the men on for miles. When the bombs were falling, the bird would snap, running with sword in the air, wailing, foam flying from his mouth, face purple. During one bombing, he ran the POWs outside, stood them at attention, and ordered the guards to aim rifles at them while he raced among men, swinging his sword over their heads. No one felt the bird's wrath as Louis did. Every day the bird sped around in search of the American. Louis hid, but the bird always found him, launching himself at him in what Tinker called his death lunge. Dazed and bleeding, Louis was sure Watanabe wouldn't stop until he was dead. Under the onslaught, Louis began to come apart. The bird stalked his dreams, screeching, whipping him and his belt. In the dreams, Louis's rage would overwhelm him, and he'd leap on his monster, his hands on the corporal's neck, strangling the life from him. Some 300 miles away, Phil was wasting away in Zensuji POW camp. He'd been transferred there in August, joined one-legged Fred Garrett. The Zensuji diet was so poor that men wandered about, ravenous, pulling up weeds and eating them. Their drinking water was runoff from rice paddies fertilized with human excrement, which left all POWs afflicted with severe diarrhea. In one barracks, men lost an average of 54 pounds over 18 months. Some 20 men fainted each day. Others went blind from malnutrition. In November, they buried an American who'd starved to death. On a Friday night in December 1944, the telephone rang in the home of Phil's mother, Kelsey. The War Department had received news from Sensuji. Alan was alive. Jubilant, Kelsey the department to cable her husband and her son's fiancée. In Washington, see the news she'd awaited for so long. The fortune teller had said Alan would be found before Christmas. It was December 8th. Cece shouted for joy, quit her job, dashed through an apartment, throwing her clothes and pictures of Alan into a suitcase, and hopped the plane for Indiana to wait for her fiancé to come home. In letters sent to the Zamparinis and Phillipses, the War Department asked family members not to speak publicly about the fact that Louis and Alan were alive. The department probably didn't want it known that it had mistakenly declared two men dead, especially as the Japanese were publicizing this fact in order to demoralize Allied troops. Both families honored this request, and the public went on believing that Louis and Phil were dead. As relieved as Kelsey was, she couldn't forget that others were so much less fortunate. Hornet men, only Louis and Allie had found. It is difficult to rejoice outwardly when I think of the other mothers, she wrote to Louise, how my heart goes out to them. As Christmas neared, Louis faltered. Starvation was consuming him. The Red Cross sent relief packages, but the Japanese stole them. We could see them throwing away unmistakable wrappers, carrying bowls of bulk cocoa and sugar between huts, and even trying to wash clothes with cakes of American cheese, wrote Tom Wade. Out of 240 relief boxes, the bird stole 48, more than 500 pounds of goods. One day, the bird ordered all POWs outside, where they found a truck brimming with apples and oranges. As the famished men grabbed the fruit, photographers snapped photos. Just as the men were ready to eat, the order came to put it all back. The entire thing had been staged for propaganda. On Christmas Eve came a small, sweet respite from the suffering. Among the POWs was a chronically filthy, ingenious kleptomaniac named Mansfield. Shortly before Christmas, to the storehouse, slipping past 7 guards and several Red Cross packages, while he buried under his barracks. which he buried under his barracks. Discovering his cake, guards locked him in a punishment cell. Mansfield broke out, stole 16 more parcels, and snuck back to the cell. He built a secret compartment and hid the loot inside, marking the door with a message for other imprisoned POWs. Food, help yourself, lift here. Caught again, he was tied to a tree for days. In conversations with other POWs, Mansfield mentioned that in the storehouse he'd found a Red Cross theatrical trunk. This gave the POWs the idea of staging a Christmas play. They secured the bird's approval by naming him Master of Ceremonies and giving him a throne at the front of the theater, the bathhouse, with planks perched on washtubs to serve as a stage. The men put on a production of Cinderella, written with hilarious creative liberties. Frank Tinker was Prince Leander of Pantoland. The fairy godmother was a gigantic Brit in a tutu and tights. Characters included Lady Diarrhea and Lady Gonorrhea. The guards laughed and clapped, and Louis thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. The bird gloried in the limelight, and for that night he let Louis and the others be. After Christmas, the bird stopped attacking the POWs, even Louis. He paced, brooding. The men watched him and wondered what was going on. They soon learned. He'd been promoted to sergeant and transferred to another camp. Someone told Louis the bird was leaving. Louis was overwhelmed with joy and relief. The bird threw himself a goodbye party. The officers dashed around camp, gathering stool samples from dysentery patients, slathered the gravy over the rice cakes, and presented them to him as a gift. As the men spoke of how they'd miss him, the bird ate heartily. If the rice cakes performed as intended, they did. As Louis watched, the bird left, looking perfectly well. The reign of terror was over. That's the end of chapter 26. We'll get to 27 in the future.